This is a spoiler-free reading wrap-up for the month of November. November for me was 3 books, but one of those 3 books was the biggest book I have read all year, and honestly probably in the past few years. So I'm really proud of myself for getting 3 when I didn't even know that I would be able to for sure finish the huge one. And let me tell you, if you're afraid of big books, like I am, this is your sign that you shouldn't be. Because I feel so silly for thinking I couldn't have finished. Whatever. The first book of my November was One by One by Freida McFadden. This is the one that my girlfriend picked for our book club, and it was not my taste. It is about a group of 6 adults who have been friends over years, and they go on a trip and they're supposed to go to a lodge, but they get lost on the way and they are trying to find their way out of the wilderness. And of course they have no cell reception. So immediately you're picking favorites. It could be anyone, and I just felt like the end result was cheating, and therefore I can't condone it being a good mystery to me. The author knows exactly what plus what equals what and has the perfect formula for just trying to get a page turner, and then it felt more like the author was trying to get us to never guess the ending than building the characters, and I don't know if that's normal. It wasn't like clever, it was just, are you kidding me? That was a dull note to start November off with, but I did read it fast because I really knew I had to get busy on my next book, being 11/22/63 by Stephen King. I couldn't even tell you how crazy it was to me that I loved every single page of this book. I was never flipping ahead to see when my chapter would end. I was never wondering if we could skip forward a little bit. Like, I really thought that I would find myself thinking that there was a lot that could have been omitted from this. And I liked every single section, every single chapter, and every single part of this read. The biggest con that I had was I actually didn't read this edition. I read a library edition, which was like a hardcover of the mass market. So it was even bigger. It was probably like as thick as this, but it was like taller and harder, and it was just like the worst thing to carry. So like on the bus or just putting it in my bag, it took up like half my freaking bag. So like my biggest con for this massive book that had intimidated me like crazy was how ridiculous it is to like physically read. But this edition, like, I could have read this like nobody's business. This one has like really good flop factor to it. This had been on our shelf for a while because it is Nick over at Books Are Sick's favorite book, he claims. And he somewhat recently read another book that made him question whether or not this one was still his like top tier #1 book. And so for November, it was his Patreon book club pick. What better time to read and tackle this big book than with Nick? Crazy timing in the world to read this book, I think, with an election just happening and then reading it in November. So like, I'm trying to read this book in the sake of this month, and then as you get to the end, he's nearing on his adventure the date at the end of the month, and so it really made me feel like the time was rushing on, and I felt that pressure that your main character must be feeling to make it to 11/22 and stop the assassination and see what happens and if that changes the world for the better. I also felt like with my really limited knowledge of Stephen King, there were some Easter eggs that I picked up on in here just from understanding pop culture and maybe seeing a couple of Stephen King movies that I haven't read the books for, that make me want to dive into more of his stuff. So read it with a friend and you can do it. I picked up Saturday Night at the Lakeside Supper Club by J. Ryan Stradal. This book was simply a cover buy, but not for this book. I kept seeing this other book by the same author around. The Logger Queen of Minnesota. Was book shopping and I found Lakeside Supper Club and it clicked in my head, and sure enough, same author. So I figured I would save this one for my second read, and I'll probably actually read this in December. But this one, it is so clear that the author has some sort of close experience or tie to like family-owned restaurants, and you're following and hearing about the life of a main character who inherits her family's supper club in like a rural Minnesota, northern lake town. And she falls in love and marries a man who's from like a very capitalistic chain of restaurants, and he's supposed to inherit those. So you have throughout the entire book this constant like give and take and weighing of the scales between like keeping it local and one businesses and family establishments, and then just like total industry domination. And I felt like that kept me interested the entire book. I thought that was really, really fun. And I don't know anything, so maybe I'm just entirely fooled by the knowledge that Stradal puts in here, but I really felt like I was reading from an author who wrote this from experience. And I'm not shocked if that's true, because it seems like the other books kind of dip into different areas of the same niche. Ultimately, I thought this was a really, really fun plot, and I would recommend it. It would be a great book club book, I think. It would be really fun to discuss. But I feel like the ending was very, very frantic. It was like, why did we spend so much time for the first 4/5 of the book to get to the end and just be rushing through time and characters even? Because you are reading from the point of views of multiple people within generations, and then you get to the end and it is a younger person, and it is chunked out into a ton of really short sections, and it feels like you're just flying through her life. So maybe that's what I needed to be able to finish 3 books in November. I still would say I enjoyed this read. I'm really hoping that I enjoy The Logger Queen of Minnesota just a little bit more though. So these are my 3 books for the month of November. It is a crazy amount of pages for just 3 books, and I am officially actually at my Storygraph goal of 50 books for the year by now. So anything that I'm reading in December is purely for fun, and I will use it to gauge how much higher I should make my goal for 2025. I do think that I will be starting my December off with Leigh Bardugo's The Familiar. This has just been sitting on my shelf for far too long. I also have Ninth House and Hellbent, and I need to get to them, and I just hold Leigh Bardugo on such a pedestal because The Six of Crows duology is one of my favorite books of all time. I need to put my money where my mouth is and read something from Leigh Bardugo that is A, new. I need to read Leigh Bardugo within the past, I haven't read in like 5 years. So like, what if I'm just having a false favorite because I was a child when I read the other ones, but they're just like iconic to me. So I have really, really high hopes, and I don't even know a ton about this book because I just want to go in blind and let her world and her characters just kind of like come to me as they might. This is, I think, a really maybe unpopular opinion, but this is a sprayed edges copy, and I hate black sprayed edges because I feel like once you read them, they never look the same. They never look the same, and it's not worth it. They're not cute. So this is what it looks like now. Let's see if in December it looks crusty.